3 at school. I like to play with my friends at school with my sister Tari.
Josh goes to a mainstream school. He's in year 3 this year. He has cerebral palsy and autism. At home, he's very chatty and very friendly. He loves having visitors. He's got a lot to say. The goals we have for Josh moving forward would be to walk independently. One of his other goals is social skills, trying to build those friendships. Josh has been on the NDIS since he was 3 years old, and over that time he's had a range of different AT supports. The ones that he uses the most at the moment are his wheelchair and his walker.
I'm getting really good at walking in my walker. I'm feeling really happy learning to walk. My legs are getting really strong.
His iPad has been a huge change for him with the communication devices, because he has the ability now sometimes to express something that was more difficult for him. Josh also has a headset that he uses. He's got a paralysed vocal cord, so he uses the headset to help project his voice. And he has a whole heap of other supports in his package that he's had over time.
I use my iPad to talk to my teachers and friends. I feel really happy that I can share with my friends and family.
Since getting some of this AT equipment, Josh has changed dramatically. The biggest change we've noticed is his independence. So we're really proud of the progress that Josh has been making, and it's making a big difference to our family.
To find out more about assistive technology, visit ndis.gov.au/AT.
What a great story. Hello and welcome to the National Disability Insurance Agency's Assistive Technology Talk webinar. I'm Matt Wright. I'm deaf and using assistive technology as part of today's proceedings. Shortly, I'll introduce you to our expert panel, but I'd like to first start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respect to their elders, both past and present. It's great also to have 2 Auslan interpreters here today, ensuring that many people from my communities will not miss out. Thank you. I appreciate your work. You can join the conversation by submitting your online questions and comments. We have a dedicated team that will be answering as many questions as possible. So let's get the discussion started. On the panel with me here today is Karun Gupta, General Manager of Service Delivery and Performance. He's affectionately known as KG. KG has been with the NDIA since February 2018 with a strong background in service delivery across sectors like telcos, energy, banking and finance. KG is here today because his division is responsible for all the NDIA planners who make plan approvals, including AT nationally. Also on the panel is Dr. Lloyd Walker, Director Assistive Technology, Markets, Providers and Sector Development from the NDIA. Lloyd is a professional rehabilitation engineer who has been working in AT for over 25 years. As a user of AT, he has always had an interest in improvements in technology and its applications to enhance participation. We're also very fortunate to have 2 other panellists who know assistive technology from first-hand experience. Carl Thompson is an NDIS participant and AT user. He is a Bachelor of Business and completed his honours thesis in ethical consumerism. He was formerly a National Policy Officer at the Australian Federation of Disability Organisations. He's currently working as an NDIS consultant, and he has both professional experience and a personal interest in assistive technology. And finally, Leah Van Poppel, an NDIS participant and AT user, and the CEO of Women with Disability in Victoria. Leah led the Every Australian Counts engagement with people with disability across Australia that led to the NDIS, and is now the board chair of the Every Australian Counts. Welcome all. KG, I'd like to start with you. What is the agency doing to address the delays for participants who need assistive technology?
So let me start by this, Matt. I think as an agency, we're sorry that a lot of people have had to wait a long time to get the assistive technology or AT supports that they need from the agency. This is one of the top 3 priorities for me, my team, and all our agency staff to work through. Over the last 12 months, there have been several lessons learned of what we did in trial that is not sustainable to do at the large scale of the scheme now. And we are working similar to new improvements that we brought in earlier in the year around whether it's replacing your IT or looking at low-cost IT items that you don't have to provide a code for, and you can get access to them quite quickly. So over the coming 6 to 12 months, there are more improvements to make the experience and the wait times reduce. And recently, the government also announced a service guarantee. We are working through the details, and there'll be more announcements coming shortly on how the agency is working on reducing these delays.
Terrific. And so the service guarantee might be something like committing to a particular time frame on AT.
Yes, it will be. And what we've uncovered is at times the delays could be because the agency process hasn't worked quickly enough to meet the needs and expectation of our participants. Equally, we've also found at times we haven't received the information from the participant or the specialist assessor that they're using to back to the agency that we can use and make that decision. So we're working on several strategies to get that worked through.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like there's a fair bit in train. Lloyd, what is in the pipeline to improve the situation more long term?
So thanks, Matt. The focus that my teams have done is to assist the KG's teams in service delivery, but also to build some changes to our structures. And that is in particular in relation to our computer systems, so we can help participants track information going through there, but also for participants with complex needs, connecting them to a specialised assessor early, preferably during the pre-planning phase, before they've actually got the plan approved, and to get status what might be the things that they need, the AT, which is how we shorten assistive technology, AT in their plan. That looks at a range of things. It may suggest things they need straight away within this time, 1 year plan, but also things maybe in 2 or 3 years time. It'll also identify what supports might the participant need to actually go and implement that plan. So they may need to get, and probably will get, advice from somebody they know really well, an OT or a physio or somebody like that, as well as connecting with providers. And there can be funding put into capacity building for that sort of work as well. That means that when they then go to the planning conversation with the planner, everybody's got quite a lot of really useful information to build a good and solid plan. The aim is that that will all be in our systems and will then be approved. So then they don't need to come back to the agency for any further approvals. They just get on and implement the plan and tell us at the end of that plan period, how did it all go to make a set up for the next one.
Terrific. So essentially it's a bit more hand-holding to ensure that we get to an outcome.
I think it goes back to KG's point. It's about timely provision of information. So if we identify a person needs a little bit more information provided, evidence to support the plan, we get it at the right time. So before the plan is being constructed, we work out what does it look like, make sure that that goes into the conversation so planner and participant can build a really good plan from the start.
Terrific, Lloyd. And how does the NDIA view AT in enabling participant participation and in pursuing of their goals?
Okay, so that I don't think really has changed, because an AT is a very powerful enabler for people with disability right across the world. Yep. And it continues to grow. And the agency knows, based on our recent data, that about a quarter of all NDIS participants have a capital AT item in their plan. That means an item that costs about $1,500 or more. So there's quite a number of participants who have that equipment. It's a misunderstanding that this equipment's always expensive. So a lot of participants will benefit from low-cost equipment. And we've certainly found in some of the tests we've done recently with our arrangements, it's simple things like modified cutlery that can make the difference between a person having to wait for somebody else to cut up their food and to have dinner versus to just make your own sandwich and get on with having some food. But then there are other items which are more expensive, and yes, we would see them as definitely an investment. So perhaps a modified vehicle may cost quite a bit of money, but it might enable a person with a spinal cord injury to go and pick up the kids, go and get a job back in an office complex somewhere, all of those sort of things. So they really get back into living their day-to-day life. And it's not just for the here and now. So you can see, obviously, the participation benefits of some of that investment, but it's also longer term. The NDIS is an insurance scheme. So if we invest in the right equipment now, it can also potentially mean that person will avoid further injury down the track or maintain and strengthen their function through a long period of life, maybe working, but also just enjoying what we would call an ordinary life.
I'm just going to add a point to that, Matt. So one of the big pieces is how was that information coming in from our participants into the agency, and consistency of getting that right, that we could address those requests in a timely way. So when Lloyd's touched on complex items, almost 93% of the items that people are requesting are under the value of 15,000. Some of them do need assessments and could have complex needs, but a huge number is actually not in that complex space. So some of the improvements that our team have been working together on is how do we streamline how do we get our planning teams working quicker on those items that people have been waiting for unacceptably long times and get those decisions made a lot quicker. Yeah. So consistency across each state, across each team, and we're doing a lot of work in building people's capability and all the material that they have available to make those decisions quicker.
Terrific, KG. That's very reassuring. And also, Lloyd, I think you make an excellent point about that we want people with disability leading an ordinary life, and an ordinary life is in the community, as part of the community, like any other citizen. I might bring Carl into the discussion at this point. Carl, you're a user of AT. Yep. Can you tell us a little bit about your disability and how you use AT in everyday life?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So I use an electric wheelchair. So that's for mobility. It's for, driving to the train station, for work, accessing my house, making sure I'm sitting upright, that type of thing. Postural support. Also other pieces of AT which I use would be ceiling hoists for, getting dressed in the morning, shower chairs for, having a shower, even things like a high-low bed so I can get on my bed safely and support workers can assist me safely. But then even smaller things like light bulbs, which I can turn on and off using my phone, that connect to other things like Google Home and that type of thing, which means I can do more things for myself, so I'm more independent. And that way I can rely less on other people because there's cost savings and kind of, independence benefits that I get from the AT that I have.
And Carl, your chair is very high tech. In fact, they had to send the mold or something to Germany to ensure that you had the right seating position. And it does things like it goes up and down so that, if you're talking to people and you want to be at a different level, you can be elevated, or if you want to come down, you can come down as well.
Yeah, so wheelchairs are can be very complicated, and there's different parts. So, for instance, my wheelchair today, the actual base of the chair is quite old. It's about 7 years old, but the seat itself is only about 6 months old. So there's different parts, and then they all work together, and they all require things like repairs and maintenance to work smoothly. Because if any of the parts aren't working properly, then the whole thing breaks down a little bit. So they're complicated, but when they work well, they're very, very useful, especially for complex people like myself.
Terrific. Yeah. And tell us a bit about your Google Home, where you can turn on your heating and your lights through your phone.
Yeah, well, that's one of my favourite examples of kind of modern AT, because it's a mainstream product, so it's generally a bit cheaper than more complex specific AT. And most people see things like Google Home as a bit of a luxury or a toy. But for me, it's really useful for, turning on the air conditioner or turning on the lights, that type of thing, even setting alarms when I'm in bed by myself. So, for me, it's more of a assistive technology device rather than purely entertainment.
I think one of the things, if I can interject, Carl, that offers you is it means you don't have to get somebody to come in and do those things for you. If the remote's sitting over on another table, you've actually got control through your phone where you are, so you can manage your environment like many of the rest of us would.
Yeah.
I'd get up and walk over to that, but you don't have that benefit if you're...
Yeah, exactly right, yeah.
And Carl, when we spoke before, it's like supports are a critical thing as well. So you had a home that was set up with all the technology that you need. It was only when the NDIS came in that you were able to get enough support in terms of moving out from the parents and living independently.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to be in a position to have my own house. But prior to the NDIS, I didn't have enough hours for support workers. So even though I had a house that it was ready for me to move into, in terms of modifications and that type of thing, I didn't have enough support worker hours. So with the NDIS, they provided funding for that, which meant I could move out of my family home. And again, it kind of shows that, you know, everything needs to work well to get the best outcome. You know, you can't have good AT and no core supports. And so everything needs to really work well to get the most out of your plan.
Just going to add a point to what Carl just called out there. I think and that's what we're finding a lot is IT is crucial, absolutely, but it's part of the bigger plan and all the supports that our participants need to meet their core goals and also capacity building. If there's delays with IT, then that has other implications and vice versa. So I think that's one of the things we are also working hard on, building that awareness of timeliness.
Yeah, and putting things together as a bundle, you know, not funding things in isolation.
Absolutely.
Is really important. Yep.
Yeah, so Carl, you have all of the things that a person with a disability should expect: independence, meaningful relationships and work. So it's clear to me that getting the right assistive technology can make a huge difference in someone's life.
Yeah, and that's definitely true. It's really important. And again, you know, it means that I can live an ordinary life and not have to kind of worry about these things because, you know, when things are working well, you almost take it for granted, and it's only when things don't work or things need repair or there's issues, that's when you kind of think about how important they are.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, at this point, I might bring in Leah to the conversation. Leah, let's take a trip down memory lane. Your mother contracted rubella when she was pregnant, and as a result, when you were born, you lost your sight. Can you take me through what technologies were important for you along your journey?
Sure. So when I was born, we knew that I was totally blind, but we didn't know that I had a hearing impairment. And we actually didn't find that out for a couple of years because I was a child of the 80s. There weren't tests to do that sort of thing. And my mum carried me everywhere as a baby and talked to me because she knew I couldn't see. So I didn't have some of the language delays that might have indicated a hearing impairment. When that was finally worked out, I got hearing aids. So putting hearing aids on a 3 or 4 year old is, as the people in the audience who've done it will know, is a challenge. Getting them to stay, making sure you don't lose things, and making sure that you don't have to repair bits all the time is really, really challenging.
I can totally relate to that one.
Yeah. Yep. My mum did a really good job of making sure that was kept on track. And as I got older, going to a mainstream school, I began to use different bits of adaptive technology. So I used things like magnifiers, but also monoculars that would let me see things on the whiteboard or the blackboard at school. And then when I got to high school, I had access to a laptop. And that was really useful for me because it meant I could take notes and do my assignments without worrying about my handwriting being an issue. And it meant that I was able to go back and look at those notes really readily later on, so that it really aided my learning. When I finished school, I went off to university, and there you're looking at, again, sort of this is early 2000s, a lot's changed in technology, but a lot of the papers and things that I had to look at were just in print, and they weren't easily enlarged. I would have been carrying around a whole stack of stuff. So I used CCTV, which is a machine where you have a tray, you put the piece of paper underneath, it picks up from a camera what's on the tray and just enlarges it on a screen. So that meant that I could read more complex papers really, really easily, especially things like statistics where you have graphs. And that's really hard to interpret with a vision impairment. Then I lost my hearing. So one of the things that's happened for me over time is my sight has gotten better for operations and things, but my hearing has gotten worse. Implant, which has been really, really helpful. I'm using the cochlear implant today to be able to hear all of the other speakers, and I'm able to use it in lots of ways to hear in different environments. Over the last 5 or 10 years, I think the big game changer for me has been having access to an iPad and an iPhone. So I use those as AT in ways that, you know, maybe other people use them as well. Like Carl was talking about the Google Home being something that other people would use, but he just needs it more. And that's true for me with my iPads and things as well. So I will use Kindle a lot to read books, and I can change the font size and the background to mean that I can actually read what I want to read. And I also use Netflix on my iPad as well. I can stream that straight into my cochlear implant now, so I can hear better. And I can also hold it up close, which means that I can see the captions as well. And some of the Netflix shows have audio description, which is brilliant, because that means I can follow what's going along when there's a dark scene or something happens really quickly.
And Netflix was also a fabulous thing for the deaf community. It was the first time that everything was captioned in the one place at the one time.
That's right.
Yeah. So you mentioned the cochlear, but it's, you know, people wouldn't realise that these things aren't all easy. It was quite a tricky operation and all of that type of thing before you got to the benefit.
Yeah, that's right. People think that really you get a cochlear implant and it's like magic. For some people it is, but sometimes it is a bit of a longer journey. So I had complications with the first operation when I had my cochlear implant installed, and so it took a lot longer to do the switch on. And then once you get a cochlear implant, you have to do some adjustment. You're not just able to turn it on and hear everything naturally. And for some people, that never comes. So I can hear reasonably well. I can stream phone calls into my implant now directly. Again, that's a great piece of technology, and it's really, really new. So I'm quite excited about that because I can really follow phone calls, even with people who have speech impairments now, quite well. But it took a long time. And in large groups or in large meetings, I have to use things like an audio loop, which we're using here today so that I can hear through the sound system, or an FM, which means that I can then follow what's going on in smaller group conversations.
Fabulous. So AT is a very important part of your life as well.
Totally. I think it would have been very difficult for me to work. I use screen enlargement software on my computer. I access papers and emails and things just electronically now. And it means that every day I'm able to access information that would be really hard for me to find in the world around me, like train timetables or what platform I need to be on. I can't read the signs. And sometimes if there's a change, it's really difficult to get that information otherwise.
Yeah.
Lloyd, both Carl and Leah have talked about personal items like iPhones and iPads being a really important part of their assistive technology. Some people with disabilities are confused. They get an iPad or an iPhone or a personal item as part of their planning. I'm just wondering if I'd throw it to you to kind of clear up some of those issues.
I can, but it's complex.
Yep.
And the part of that I could make it as simple as possible is to start by saying both Carl and Leah have said it starts with what they're trying to achieve. So as part of their disability, they have a barrier or an issue that they have to address. So for Carl, it's mobility to go and operate things in his house. For Leah, it was about being able to access print and those sort of technology systems. So that then tends to lead to, well, what are the possible solutions I could use to solve that problem? So once that's been established, then potentially mainstream technologies like the iPhone or iPad or tablets, if we stick away from being brand specific, a tablet type solution will often run the app or the thing that makes that work. If Carl just needs a phone to answer his phone calls, well, I buy one and I'm sure Carl will buy his own. So that's not an appropriate thing really for reasonable and necessary funding. Yeah. But for Leah, it's pivotal to to have a phone with the appropriate apps. And she may choose a particular style of phone, and then the app would definitely be reasonable and necessary. But she also might find that she needs the app, but she's never had a phone. And then in order to operate the app, obviously she's going to need the technology to make it possible. So it really does have to start with, well, what is the functional factor that the person's trying to address that would be something that a person that doesn't have a disability doesn't require?
Yeah, and if I could jump in, sorry, yeah, it's a similar example with computers. You know, I wouldn't expect the NDIS to purchase a computer for me, but I also use speech recognition software to do work or to communicate with friends. So I speak and it turns into text. And that's something which the NDIS might be more likely to fund. So, you know, I wouldn't expect the NDIS to purchase a computer because that's something which is now, you know, even though it might be expensive, it's still an everyday item which most families have.
Well, but I guess, Carl, you're using it for a whole range of things. So it's the software that's specific, enabling to address an aspect of your disability that you want to use that computer more effectively. And that's definitely moving into the space of the reasonable and necessary.
Yeah, I think to building on Carl's point, at times the volume of requests that are coming in that people in the community might think that the scheme needs to cover, but when we apply that reasonable and necessary lens and what the NDIS Act requires us to do, that at times also slows down how things actually work out. So there are examples where if a communication device is a core device that the participant needs to communicate and carry on with their day-to-day life, that we will look at that as, if that device happens to be a tablet, then that will be
tablet with the right apps.
With the right apps, but including the tablet, not just the apps. But if that's just only to build their capacity, they're looking to get more apps that'll help to build the capacity, then it's only the apps that will support as reasonable and necessary, not the whole device. So, and that's where the fine balance for our broader planning team and for us at an agency is.
And I think if I finish that, I won't finish it. But anyway, in terms of what the agency can help people with, the technology they may already have, is a lot of that technology has some built-in smarts. We're getting much more universally designed technology. And so it's certainly in scope for the agency to support funds to help people get set up time and training on how to use those features they may already have in the equipment they've got in their hands. And that's definitely a valuable thing that they could.
Great, thanks, Lloyd. All right, we might go now to our online audience. Katrina has written in, is the NDIA doing anything to minimise waiting times for assistive technologies, i.e. braille, displays, speech synthesizer, software, CCTVs? KG, I think you've mentioned, but do you want to add anything further?
I think given some of the things that Katrina's mentioned, if any of them require adjustments or they're more complex, I think some of the points that Lloyd earlier raised on what we are looking from an assessment pilot point in a couple of areas in New South Wales and ACTs to try and get those assessments done earlier in the planning process before the plan's approved, so it becomes part of a full holistic solution for that participant's needs. And then we can work through that and get that decision made much more efficiently. Unless, Lloyd, anything you want to add to that?
I think the other thing, KG, is your team have also introduced a strategy for some of those items. They're what we would call mid-cost items. And so there is a way perhaps for the planner to identify, yes, somebody needs, in Leah's identified space of a means of being able to interpret something that's come through email, but I can't see it. So maybe something in the braille space. They could describe that in the plan, put a relevant line item in, and indicate the typical amount of money that the planner has agreed is reasonable. That would then enable the participant to go off and find the exact item, bring back the proposal, and then that would or nearly always be.
Okay, Rebecca asks, iPads are dedicated communication devices. Is an AT request required, or can they be claimed through low-risk consumables? Might throw that over to Lloyd.
Okay, so because the identification here is a communication device, typically in this case it's going to be face-to-face communication, the focus would be, in our mind, to go and get good advice as to what is the right solution, because some people believe a certain app on an iPad will solve all their communication problems, but it may not be the right solution. So we do fund into capacity building money for the participant to go and have a conversation, in this case with a speech pathologist, get good advice, make sure that the technology you're thinking is the right one. And if it comes in that low cost space, then you've got good evidence as to why it's a reasonable thing to get.
Great, thank you. Paul has asked what AT can and can't be purchased with a self-managed plan. So I might throw to KG on this one.
Sure. So I think when it comes to IT through a self-managed plan, as long as, depending upon which level of complexity that AT falls into, our website's got some really clear guidelines and some really good material available on the AT page, which can help even for self-managed plans. It's which assessors they go and use to give them the assessment report. And when you're self-managing, you've got a broader choice of providers you could go to and get those assessments done. So I think I'll encourage Paul to look at that help guide on our website, and that's got a lot more detail. If in case they've got any questions or something that's not working, they can either contact our contact center first on 1-800-800-110, or they can email their local office, which on our website, we've got every local office listed.
Great, thanks KG. Shannon has called through and wants to know what can be done about the shortfall in hire equipment that is occurring for participants while they await AT to be approved and then supplied. In many cases, they are waiting in excess of months without the right equipment, and in some cases, this has resulted in pressure injuries and required hospitalisation. Lloyd.
I'll start, but I think KG's also got some thoughts into this space as well. Trial is definitely an element, and we have clear guidance to our planning teams, particularly where participants have got complex pieces of technology, that including money for trial and hire of equipment is a really important part of a plan. Gives them the opportunity to test items and see how that's working. But in this case, it could also give them funds into plan, and there's some money there for repairs and maintenance, but that can also be used for trial to get somebody through a period where perhaps their technology is broken down and they're waiting for a repair or a fix. We will be strengthening that in coming months, and KG's got some thoughts in that space, I think.
So I think while there's can you rent to get some, let's say, cover between you or until you've had the trial completed and you can now procure that device. If you're struggling and you want to escalate that issue, that you haven't heard back or something's not gone, we've got a very simple process now where I'm encouraging, and people like, I think Shannon's raised the question is they need to contact our contact center on 1-800-800-110, raise that matter with them, and they will pass that as an urgent request straight to the local office. And then once the local office gets it, we can prioritize that request and work through it and make sure if funds were not included, depending upon when their plan started, we can make that adjustment to that plan quicker and have those funds available.
We definitely want to avoid those issues which may lead to a person to get an injury, a deterioration of their health, or at the worst case, going to hospital. That's not the way we want it.
I think Leah wants to add a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think it's really good that there's some process change around this, but if people are struggling with getting that access to AT and it's getting urgent for them, it's also really good to know that there are disability advocacy agencies out there who can assist you with talking to the agency and making sure that your request lands in the right spot. So that's really important.
So I think, Leah, what you raised there is one of our key findings through all the work we've been doing together and a lot of the people in the agency to understand where is the request sitting at now. And what we find is often there have been multiple emails that have been sent about the same request at times, would might sort of mask how big or how long has someone been waiting. So one of the new things in that process we're trying to bring is identify the participants who, at this point, we don't have the right assessment or the right response back from them, but then proactively contact them. And when we are contacting them, the number might come as a private number, which at times people don't respond to. So that's one of the ways we're trying to improve this, that rather than letting it wait for months and months when the participant might not even know, that we are waiting an action on the participant's part to provide either an additional assessment report or additional piece of information That's crucial for us to make that decision. So those calls will start, but they will come from private numbers, which at times the community might say it's either a telemarketing call and not take it. So we're looking at, does our team send an email first and then contact? We're testing a few of those things.
So, Carl, if your chair went down tomorrow, would your supplier step in, or would you know who to contact?
Yeah, well, I was about to jump in actually. I think one of the big issues that we've got with this is even if the NDIS or the NDIA approves funds and people can go out and purchase AT at the moment, especially for complex AT, there's just not really enough suppliers who are either available or able to do some of the complicated requests. And that's a bit of a challenge where there's no easy answer, but and that might be why there is such a gap between someone putting in a request for actually purchasing or procuring AT and then waiting months before they actually get it. And that's something which hopefully the agency is working on in trying to get more people to come on board and sell AT and become skilled at that, and people starting businesses. And
it's an important point. It's an important point, Matt, and it's a matter that the chairman of the NDIA board has flagged. It's not just the agency making decisions; it's also a supply element, which is what Carl's really looking at. But it's really difficult for suppliers if they're not sure when the agency is going to make a decision. So all the work that KG's team is doing about getting that smoother and being more consistent and clear then enables providers to organise themselves to pick up the baton, if we're going to call it that, and take it through to completion, sometimes even pre-ordering if they're fairly confident it's going to go through. Yes, we do have more work to do in this whole area of market development, and that includes things like, I've been talking in a few forums about options that participants could sign up to for a year-long subscription to repairs and maintenance, for instance. So you could effectively prepare yourself in case anything does happen through the year. And then you have a phone number that might be on a sticker on your chair. You can just dial into your phone, or it might even be on speed dial for you, Carl. Speed dial, okay, I'm here, the chair's just clunked out, can somebody come down and get you? They look you up and go, yes, you're on our register, we'll be there in 20 minutes, a bit like RACV in Victoria. That sort of thing is stuff we're looking at.
Great. Leah?
Lloyd, in the meantime, if someone has an issue where their wheelchair goes down or their braille printer stops working, what's the best thing for them to do right now?
So there's two pathways there. One is, depends how new it is. So if it's only reasonably recently been bought, this equipment is the participant's equipment, unless there's an agreement some other way. So the participant might be able to just phone the supplier and say, well, I just got this braille printer about 2 months ago. It's a dud. I need another one, and I need it now because I depend on it. And that's a warranty repair, like other things. If that's not going to work, there are a range of techniques that we can do. Since February, we introduced an improvement where we're trying to identify, if you've got AT in your plan, that we actually include enough money in your plan for repair and maintenance so you can have confidence to give a phone call to the relevant repairer and say, I can get this fixed. Can you make a service booking against my plan and come and get it fixed? If you're self-managed, obviously you pay the bill yourself and claim it out of your plan. We're still in the next few weeks working with our state and territory equipment providers and other big providers to maintain some of those connections so that participants who've got used to being able to get one of those big providers to come and do repairs, there's ways to support participants where perhaps the plan is missing the funds so that they're not left stranded without any where to go. I think it goes back to KG's point. If participants are concerned and they're really stuck, the state equipment programs will step in, as will sometimes RACV, NRMA, all of those groups will often get a participant out of trouble in a mobility situation. But if it's just that the equipment you've discovered this morning on Monday is broken, you need help, contact our contact centre and they'll try and make the connections to work and get a solution. Is that sort of answer?
We might go to our next question. Okay, Trudy asks, why are some AT approved in some states and not in others? Shouldn't it be consistent across all states? KG.
That falls squarely onto me. Thank you. Thank you, Trudy. I think this is, when I say Why is it part of our top 3 priority? So I think NDIA, we're close to having 300,000 participants nationally. And having 300,000 participants in the scheme who are supported through funded supports also create a massive opportunity to keep working on building consistency in practice, in applying reasonable and necessary decisions. So the legacy or our growth through a significant growth phase has created some issues which we are aware of, which we are working through in building that consistency of practice. So from state to state, there shouldn't be a difference. The background of where each state had a different cap on what was funded for assistive technology, the agency, since coming in, it's more about what are those individual choice and control needs, and more importantly, what's the functional impact of the disability. And then rather than saying we can only do 10,000 and you fund the rest, it's we're asking for those complexities to be clearly understood and getting the right professional assessors to assess them, so then we can make the right planning decisions. So part of that consistency journey for us over the next 6-12 months is training and retraining a lot of our staff, building the ability around consistency of applying if it's a mid-cost, mid-complexity IT request, how do we make sure that nationally we're making, if not the same, very similar decisions, because each participant's unique. So at times we've got to allow that. So recently in New South Wales, the team have done 29 training sessions, and they've trained just under 600 people around how to use some of these new process improvements that we're putting in place. And that'll continue to happen throughout the country over the coming months until we get everybody to a national consistent point. Yeah. So it's definitely fair and square on our pad.
Yeah, you make a great point. You've led a lot of that consistency, but each participant is different. Absolutely. And there are small variations in people's plans, even with similar disabilities.
Absolutely. I think that's where, while we are striving towards a baseline experience that everyone can expect from us, we need to allow for those things to be tweaked according to each individual's needs. What Carl and how Carl uses his Google Home is completely different to what Leah's needs are. While we will put them both under the $1,500 sort of $15,000 mid-cost elements, but how they're being used, that's completely different.
Yeah. Terrific. All right, we might go to our next question, which is Katrina. Can you please define low-cost items for AT? For low-cost, low-risk items, my understanding was that this can be funded through consumables. Lloyd.
Yeah, lucky me again. So low cost, the agency understands, is generally items less than $1,500.
Yes.
And yes, you're absolutely right, Katrina. It is in the core budget. It's under the consumables budget 3. But at the moment, the term is daily adaptive equipment. There's a line item generally there. But after 1 July, we're going to switch it, and the words will be low cost assistive technology. So that's where you can go. Most participants self-manage that budget. And that gives them a lot of flexibility. They can go to Bunnings, they can go to the chemist, they can go to, if it's modified cutlery, they might find it even at David Jones. All of these types of stores suddenly become available. Participants can go and check it out, make sure it's the right thing to address their disability needs, and then buy it, and then claim it out of their self-managed funds.
Terrific. I might actually go to Leah and Carl now. You both talk to a number of people with disability. I'd be interested in your thoughts about what you think that the agency is doing well in AT and what are some areas for improvement. So I'll start with Leah.
I think in terms of what the agency is doing well, when you get AT that you've not had before, it can be really, really life-changing for people. It can mean that, for instance, you're able to get things in hard copy braille without having to go through an agency and wait a couple of months for someone to print out and copy over your musical score or some financial reports that you want to read through. You can just print that out at home. So it's really revolutionary in ways that can be quite, can seem small to other people, but really large in a person's life.
Absolutely.
In terms of what's not working so well, I think we've touched on some of that already today. You know, there are really long wait times. It is really hard to find out where anything is at. Sometimes even if you do call the contact centre, it's very, very hard to get a clear sense of where that information goes. And I think also when people are having that initial discussion with planners, particularly if you have really specific needs, so sensory disability is sometimes one, and if you've got really complicated equipment, that can be another. You feel like you have to educate the planners. A lot of people talk about that need to kind of explain to a planner what a piece of adaptive technology is for, and to be really clear about that so that it can go into the plan in the first place.
Yeah.
Terrific. KG?
I think Leah's raised a really good point, which we're working hard to address, and it's taking time. So I apologise, it's taking a long time. It's not acceptable, and we're working on getting that better. Is that participant experience of you have to explain your need to a planner who potentially does not understand it. So at the agency, we don't expect planners to be experts in IT, because that's not what their role is. It's if you've engaged a qualified professional assessor who has put that report in front, what we're building with our planners from a consistency point is that report should be enough evidence that we need to consider that that's reasonable and necessary in most cases. And if we are finding that some providers are potentially not following the reasonable and necessary lens, then that's a different problem for us to work through. And other methods of how do we influence the market and do it. But from a participant's point, from an experience, and it should be, if you've gone to a qualified professional, you brought that report with you at the planning, that should be enough for us to go, here's the evidence, that's what we need to consider and work through.
So can I just ask a follow-up question about that?
Sure, yeah.
If you go into a planning meeting and you haven't already got that report and you've got a planner who doesn't understand, what's the step to take then?
So what we then do is, based on what you feel your needs are, we put that IT line item without the specific amount in there, but then we allow enough funding in there for you to go and get those course or assessment reports, and then we can either do what we call at the agency a light touch review and activate that funding, or if we need to do some more extensive work, we can do that post that time. So we've got those to understand the mid or high cost or high complexity items. Lloyd, if you want.
So my only follow-up there, Leah, would be it's a lot easier if you've already got an item that you're wanting to replace, because you're demonstrating by your day-to-day use of it, its effectiveness for you. And that's why we introduced that simplified process for replacing AT in February. I think a lot of the work we've talked about in the last couple of months is the amount of evidence to just put the item into plan. So it could be a letter from your doctor or from somebody who's worked with you on your AT or your day-to-day requirements that says there's clear evidence that Leah's going to need this item and that should be explored in the next 12 months. That can be sufficient for a planner to have enough confidence to make the reasonable and necessary determinations. And then you've got time with some support to then implement that over the coming 12 months. Those are some of the improvements we're trying to be a bit more flexible with.
So just one more point, Matt. It's what we're almost trying to go is if it's under 1,500, what's the guidance to the planner? And then, so between 1,500 and 15,000.
Okay.
And 5,000, between 5,000 and 15,000, what's the guidance? How do we get this working more efficiently and quicker so we can get to an outcome for the participant quicker? If it's above 15,000, there's a lot more due diligence and a lot more checks we need to do to make sure
it takes time to work out the right solution so everybody's confident. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Terrific. We might now go to Carl.
Yeah, so I think one good thing that the agency is doing, KG mentioned it before, is if the NDIS agrees that something is needed by that particular person, they will generally fund the entire cost of that equipment. That's, way better than it was previously, where people had to, including myself, we used to have to fundraise for wheelchairs because the state government would only fund, a certain percentage of that.
Yeah.
So that's one good thing. But, the concern that I've got is a little bit what we've been talking about just now, is that, again, with AT, it's not just the equipment that you need funding for. You need funding for having someone to write the reports, to get the equipment. You need funding for setup of the equipment. And then you need funding for writing more reports to, justify the maintenance of the equipment as well. So making sure that, the NDIS doesn't just fund the wheelchair and no occupational therapy, or making sure that the NDIS doesn't just fund the speech device but no speech pathologist. There needs to be, really kind of clear bundles of funding that the NDIS funds, rather than just worrying about the equipment itself. That's one improvement, I think, which you might already be doing. So
it's a key element of the way the NDIA has always looked at assistive technology, and that is that KG's put it well by saying it's not planners' job to understand everything there is about what's the right assistive technology for Carl. That's where you work with a provider, and that provider needs to be funded.
Yeah.
Some for assessing, some for helping you specify it, and that's got to go in your capacity building budget, and then the money for your purchase, etc., goes into your capital, and then another bunch of money has to go into the repair and maintenance. I think the challenge is partly making sure all of those bits go together, as you say, a bundle, and we do that for people whose needs are changing rapidly. We actually can fund a bundle of money, a package, if I could use it that way. That enables the participant to work very closely with a specialist provider, and they can swap pieces of equipment as their changing needs impact their life. We're going to keep doing that better, I think, and providing more information in that space, so that it's not left in the participants' hands to have to try and remind everybody of the bits and pieces that need to be put together. You're right.
Yeah, and that's great. As long as the planner knows what they don't know, that's one of the things planners need to understand, that they don't need to know about all AT, but they need to know that there should be some provision for funding so they can explore options.
The bits and pieces that are part and parcel about making it work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Terrific. All right, we might go back to our online audience. Nancy asks, who do you contact to find out the status of an AT request that has been submitted, to find out if the application has been received, estimated timeframes? Who can do this? Can the prescriber who has completed the application find out about the status on behalf of the participant? KG.
So I'll start, and then I'm sure Lloyd's got some more words of wisdom to add.
Maybe.
So recently, I think one of the system improvements that Lloyd touched on was, I think the last part of the question was, if the prescriber has submitted the report, can they follow up on the status? So the MyPlace provider portal recently has had some improvements where they'll get notified when that report is logged or received. There's more work that's being done in that space. Similarly, for participants also, we have that we're working through in the coming months of how do we give them better visibility of where that request is sitting. But in the meantime, if your matter is urgent, I encourage everyone to pick up the phone to the contact center and raise and give as much detail as you can on the urgency of your matter. If it's you've sent your report in and you just don't know if someone's got it or they've done something with it, then you email your local office, which we've got on our website list of every single local office, either your partner that you've been LSE partner you've been working with, or directly to NDIA, whoever you're working with. And then we are putting the right process and the right discipline that people are working through those requests at pace. And if it's something that's low cost or something that's mid cost, that's quick and easy, and applying our new process, we can make a decision quicker. We can get that happening. Until we can get more improvements through the system, it does take a little bit of manual work, and I apologize for that, and I thank our participants for their patience while we keep working on fixing this.
So the contact centre has access to that information?
Yes.
Okay.
So they can see what's on the participant's file.
Yep.
If they're not clear on something, they've got a clear line of contacting someone in the planning team to get that additional information.
Okay.
But they could, if it's a simple enough inquiry of, I sent this in, can you see if it's on my file?
Yep.
In our system, the contact center can easily go. And one of the improvements that Lloyd and the team worked hard on bringing was to create a separate section in our system where all our AT information is stored. So it's accessible really quickly rather than sifting through many records.
Terrific.
My only addition would be, in May, we introduced or released new assessment forms, because one of the important parts for the agency is the privacy of our participants' information. Absolutely. And so that has been a bit of a barrier, because the participant hadn't alerted the agency that they were happy for the agency to discuss a matter with the assessor or the supplier. So those forms now have a place for the participant to give express consent, to say, it's fine for you to talk to this assessor. Then sure, the assessor can contact the agency and we can follow through on that.
Great. All right, we have another question. Tanya asks, if a participant has submitted a quote for AT and an assessment, but is allocated less in the plan to cover the full costs of the requested AT, what is the process of review and or recourse for the participant? I might go to Lloyd on this one.
I actually think it's probably more KG.
All right.
Happy to start.
Yeah, I think you might start because it is more a review question.
Absolutely. So I think the question that Tanya raised is, if you've had a decision on what the agency will fund in your plan and you're not happy with that, we've got a very clear set of obligations under the NDIS Act that we have to provide you as a participant of how you can lodge a review of that decision. So what we've done to improve the process and the timeliness of that is, as soon as you request that plan review request, we need to make a decision on that request, that are we considering that as a right request, or is that not enough information for that request to go to another plan review within 14 days. And that's when throughout this webinar, I've been talking about getting things onto our system so we can effectively track and monitor them. So that's one of the recourses they can take. What I'll encourage Tanya to do first is really look at what's been included and the flexibility of some of the supports in a plan. It might be worth speaking to if there is a local area coordinator involved who can help understand that a bit better. But if that still doesn't meet their needs, then they go down the path of requesting a review of that plan.
Great. Thanks so much, KG. All right.
Leah's going to point to add.
I just wanted to say, sometimes there are a couple of different types of review that the agency does. One, which is just about if there's a change in your circumstances, and the other is about if you're wanting to challenge a decision that has been made in your plan. So it's really important to know which kind of review is happening for you, because the kind of review that happens if you're going to challenge what's been put in your plan, which is, I think, a Section 100. Is that,
it is. That's
the
correct.
term? If you get that kind of review, you can then take it further if you are still not happy with the outcome. But if you get the other kind of review, that's not possible. So sometimes people find themselves going back to the very start of the process. If you think that that's going to be a bit confusing or challenging for you, I think, again, then please contact someone independent like an advocate to help you navigate that.
That's a really valid point that you've called out, Leah. So the two ways, so the change of circumstances in the NDIS Act is called your Section 48 request, which gets processed through what I've touched on. And then what you've called out is the internal review request or review of a reviewable decision, which is a Section 100, which we have to follow a different process and get that done. And I'm going to acknowledge we've had delays in both of those areas, which similar to what we're doing to fix our IT delays, there's work that's actively being done at the agency to get that time frame tighter, because at times people had to wait months to hear back for a review request.
Terrific. All right. Emerson asks, how do I know what sort of prescriber I need depending on the complexity of the AT? Lloyd.
Okay, I'm going to play with semantics here. I understand what Emerson's asking, but I'll make an important point for the agency, because we don't use the word prescriber in the agency, because the person who's helping a participant gather the evidence, providing information or an assessment, is working with the participant to give the evidence to the agency. They don't control, they're not a gatekeeper for whether Carl or Leah or any other participant, you or myself, Matt, can or can't have a piece of equipment. So that person who's going to give the evidence will vary depending on the complexity of the technology. So if it's a fairly simple piece of technology, it actually could be an AT mentor or somebody like that who could provide enough guidance, because they work or are connected with an independent living centre. They know the range of technologies that are available. They can give evidence that says, we looked at these items, this is the best one that's going to meet this person's needs. That's really good evidence. Once we get into, as Carl's mentioned, his complex postural supporting seating system, that's now moving into the space where I would normally expect it to be a very skilled occupational therapist or physiotherapist who's done quite a lot of seating. knows what can go wrong. It's usually expensive, and it also takes quite a bit of time, doesn't it, Carl?
Yeah, and that's what I was saying before about the setup and maintenance.
Yeah, so that person who's going to do that assessment should be competent and know exactly what they're doing so that they don't waste Carl's time. They give a good and succinct report and are confident they're working within their area of practice. So I think participants should be really clear to ask the person they're going to work with, are you confident you can give me good evidence about what I'm about to ask?
Great, thank you. All right, Caitlin is interested in understanding how the process for prescription of equipment to support transition from hospital to home may be improving. KG.
I'll start on that. So there's work that when a participant's in hospital, they can work with their health practitioner on what they need if there is a change in their circumstance after that hospitalisation. And then they can either request the agency to review the plan and make adjustments if there's new needs that have emerged. Depending upon the complexity of that IT need, then what we've been talking throughout the webinar of, we've got different pathways we can get that done for the participant. But if there is some short-term, whether it's rental or hire funding that they need support with, then they contact the NDIS through the call center or through the LSE or local office, and we can work with them.
Great, thank you. All right, so we might have to wrap it up there. I'd like to thank all the panelists and the audience for joining us today. A recording of the webinar complete with captions and a transcript will be available on the NDIS website in the coming week. We look forward to you joining us at our next NDIS webinar. We will now go to a short animation to explain the AT process. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.